Have you ever stopped to think about how a set of rights, written over 200 years ago, can possibly protect us today? I mean, in a world of smartphones, AI, and things the founders couldn't even dream of. Well, that's what we're going to break down, the fascinating and honestly super important process of how those old rights get interpreted for our modern lives.
And that's the real puzzle, right? Our lives are completely digital. We have smartphones, social media, our whole world is online. The Bill of Rights gives us these big, core promises of freedom. But how do we make sure those promises actually keep up with the insane pace of technology?
Okay, this slide right here, it just nails the problem. On one hand, you've got the Fourth Amendment, written to stop soldiers from literally kicking down your door and rummaging through your house. But what in the world does an unreasonable search mean when the government could potentially access the entire digital universe you carry around in your pocket? That's the gap, and that's what interpretation has to fix.
So, how do we bridge that gap? It really starts with understanding why these documents even need interpreting in the first place. I mean, why didn't they just write down super specific rules for every single possible situation? Let's take a look.
You know, the framers were actually really smart about this. They used big, powerful language on purpose. Phrases like freedom of speech or due process, they weren't meant to be a tiny checklist. They're huge, foundational principles meant to last for centuries. The catch, of course, is that because they're so broad, you need a solid process to apply them to really specific and often brand new situations.
All right, so if we need someone to do this critical job of interpreting, who is it? Well, that brings us to the Supreme Court and the very source of its power.
In the U.S. system, the Supreme Court is the final umpire. Its job isn't to make up new laws, that's what Congress is for. Instead, its main role is to figure out what the Constitution means when a real-life legal fight puts our rights on the line.
And this right here is the court's superpower, judicial review. It was established way back in 1803 in a case called Marbury versus Madison, and it's the principle that gives the court all its muscle. It basically says that no law, from anyone, can violate the Constitution. If there's a conflict, the Constitution always wins. It's the ultimate check on power.
So, picture this. Your Supreme Court justice, and a really tough case lands on your desk. How do you even start to figure it out? What tools do you pull out to make a decision? Let's peek inside that analytical toolbox.
So, the justices have a few core tools. First, and this sounds obvious, is textual analysis. What do the words on the page literally say? Second, they think about original meaning, and this is where a huge legal debate kicks in. Some folks believe you should only read the Constitution the way the founders understood it, period. That's a philosophy called originalism. Others say, no, its big principles have to apply to our world today. That's the idea of a living Constitution. And third, they look at precedent. How have other courts ruled on similar things before? That keeps the law stable and predictable.
But, it's not always so simple. What happens when a law seems to have a pretty good purpose, but at the same time it kind of steps on one of your rights? The court needs a way to balance the government's goal against how much it impacts your freedom. And for that, they use this really critical framework called the levels of scrutiny.
Okay, this table shows you exactly how that works. The level of scrutiny, or how hard they look at the law, depends on the right we're talking about. For our most basic fundamental rights, think freedom of speech or religion, the court uses strict scrutiny. This is the highest bar. It means the government has to have a compelling, like an absolutely vital reason for the law, and the law has to be narrowly tailored to only do that one thing. For other issues, they might use an easier test, like rational basis. It's basically a system to make sure our rights aren't taken away, without a really, really good reason.
Okay, so that's all the theory, but what does this stuff actually look like in the real world? Because these tools aren't just for law books, they have a massive impact on our daily lives. Let's look at a perfect example. Just imagine for a second, you're accused of a crime, but you have no money to hire a lawyer. For a huge chunk of American history, that was just how it was. The fairness of your trial could literally come down to how much money you had in the bank. And then came a huge, landmark case, Gideon versus Wainwright. The Supreme Court looked at the Sixth Amendment's promise of a right to a lawyer and made this powerful interpretation. They said that right is totally meaningless if you can't afford it. So, they declared that the Constitution requires the government to give a lawyer to anyone who needs one. Just like that, they turned an abstract idea of due process into a real, concrete right for millions of people. And here's the kicker. This is happening right now. In another huge case, the court looked at the Fourth Amendment and ruled police need a warrant to search your cell phone. Why? Because it contains, and I'm quoting here, the privacies of life. That is a direct line from an 18th century right to 21st century technology. It's interpretation in action, plain and simple.
When you zoom out, this is about more than just one or two cases. It's about the whole system. It's a living process that's designed to make sure our most important rights stay relevant and protected no matter how much the world around us changes.
And that's really what we mean by a living constitution. It's not that the meaning of the document just changes with the popular opinion of the day. Not at all. It lives because it's faithfully and carefully applied to the new challenges of each generation. That methodical process, that stability, that's its greatest strength.
But, and this is a really important but, while the Supreme Court is incredibly powerful, it isn't all-powerful. It can't just write laws out of thin air. That's Congress's job. It doesn't have an army or a police force to make people follow its rulings. That's up to the executive branch. And it can't just wake up one morning and decide to make a new rule. It has to wait for an actual, real case to work its way up to them. It's all part of a very carefully designed balance of power.
So this whole process of interpretation, it never really ends. As our technology and our society keep evolving, new and complicated questions about our rights are always going to pop up. And that brings us to our last thought for you to chew on. What do you think will be the next huge constitutional question that our rights will have to answer?